Hey everyone! So I made this video since we have a snow day, and unfortunately since we have so much material to go through, we really can't just skip it. So hopefully you're watching this video before our Wednesday class, because on Wednesday we are going to pick up right where this leaves off. Here I have an announcement slide. You can also find this on the PowerPoint that is posted under week 2 under the Unit 1 folder on Blackboard. I do recommend getting out all of your notes, get rid of distractions, because these PowerPoints pretty much run exactly like the lecture would. So give it its due attention, your due time to really go through this material. So to go through some announcements, I mentioned very briefly on our first day of class about this PechaKucha. All a PechaKucha is a short presentation that all of y'all will be giving. And you get to do it on any topic of biology of your choice. Maybe you're interested in a certain disease or a certain animal, or you're curious about fertilizer and agriculture, or whatever you are interested in, you can talk about in your presentation. But you do have some due dates coming up. The first one is just choosing your topic. I don't want all 22 students in our class choosing to cover global climate change, for instance. To learn more about the PechaKucha, go to the PechaKucha folder on Blackboard. The instructions are there. There's also an introductory video from me about what a PechaKucha is and the expectations of you guys. Another reminder, most of y'all have finished the homework assignment. This is due Monday at 9:30 when our class would typically start. If you completely forget, you can still turn it in by Wednesday by class time, but you will have a 25% deduction. After Wednesday's class, I will post our first weekly review quiz. You'll find that on Blackboard. And those will always be due on Sunday. And then finally, this Friday, we do have a lab quiz during the first 20 to 30 minutes of lab. So let's get started. Last class, we started talking about science. We talked about the scientific method. And then we started talking about biology. Specifically, we started talking about organizational levels. Biology is a huge subject. You're talking about the study of life. You have really big things, thinking about the world, and really, really small things like bacteria, or even smaller, thinking about cells and atoms. So really, to break up biology, we organize biology into different organizational levels. This is an outline we had talked about last class. So we have biosphere being the largest, followed by ecosystem, community, population, and multicellular organism. Now, last class we already talked about this slide. We talked about the biosphere. As the name implies, you have bio, which means life, just like biology, and then sphere, referring to the physical shape of Earth. And this is everywhere on Earth we find life. We find life in our atmosphere, in volcanoes, in the ocean, in ponds, on land. So the biosphere refers to all of those areas. Scientists who maybe study global climate change are biosphere scientists because they're studying how something, global climate change, affects the entire Earth. We talked about how the biosphere, for the most part, is a closed system. Everything that's on Earth, the clothes that you're wearing, the bed that you sleep on, the air you're breathing, all of this was recycled. That air has been around since Earth has been around. Your bed might not have been around since Earth was around, but the materials that make up your bed, the aluminum and steel that are in the springs of your mattress, came from Earth. Thinking about the cotton of your clothing as a plant, that plant comes from Earth. That plant used nitrogen and carbon and all these nutrients that are just always recycled on Earth. So we already talked about various examples, and then we ended class talking about this slide, how all water on Earth is dinosaur pee. And although that's kind of funny, it is kind of true as well, because all of those liquids in our bodies and bodies before us get recycled. We pee them out, they evaporate, it rains, we take in that water, and that's what we drink. So again, just thinking of everything on Earth is recycled. Now there are very few exceptions where Earth is also an open system. This means that there's a substance that isn't recycled on Earth, that comes from outside of Earth. So one example, I actually don't have it written on this slide, but one example is meteors. Meteors come from outside of this Earth system. Meteors are flying rock in our solar system that land on Earth. So that comes from outside Earth. It's not recycled on Earth. But the big example that is so crucial, not just for open systems, but really we'll start talking about food chains, and it's really important to recognize that energy or sunlight is part of the open system. So energy in the form of solar energy comes from our sun. So that's outside of Earth. So you're talking about outside of our system. This solar energy comes in. Now, us as humans cannot directly use that solar energy. It's not like we go outside, we get the sunshine, and we're energized. It doesn't quite work that way. It'll warm us up, but we'll go hungry if we don't eat any food. However, plants can use that solar energy. In fact, they use that solar energy and convert it into food that we ingest, that we digest, that we get our own energy from. So this one thing that Earth doesn't have, this energy, is actually so crucial for life even being on Earth. There would be no biosphere, there would be no life if it wasn't for this solar energy. So just know solar energy is part of this open system. It comes from outside of Earth's system. It actually also escapes as heat. So Earth itself kind of shines, but for the most part, when we eat, our body creates heat. And so that energy gets converted into heat energy, which then our Earth gets rid of. So something that was on Earth, this heat, is now being emitted back into space. So that was the largest level, biosphere, talking about the entire Earth. An ecosystem, or our next tier down, is a collection of organisms, so animals, plants, bacteria, and their interaction with the environment. Now, biosphere is very similar to this, but we're talking about smaller areas. Here's 3 examples down here. We have a desert. A desert is an ecosystem. Thinking about the organisms in that ecosystem, thinking about the environment. Those organisms, say, a snake is not interacting with the ocean. So you have very distinct regions that these organisms are maintaining. We have a rainforest. We have this tundra, say in Alaska. So these are all ecosystems because the organisms there stay in that general area and they interact with that environment. Now, I've mentioned 2 different aspects of an ecosystem. One are living things. We call those biotic. And here you see bio again, bio meaning life. So if I were to ask you, what are the biotic components of a desert ecosystem? You would choose any living thing that's in that desert. So we can see some trees in that background. There might be some snakes or mice camouflaging into that background. Those are all living things. Same with this rainforest. There's tons and tons of plants there. Those are all biotic. Now, an ecosystem, pardon me, an ecosystem is not only the organisms or the biotic, but it's also their interaction with the environment, with the world around them. Well, the world around them isn't necessarily living. They might interact with abiotic things or non-living things. This A in front of this word tells me without. So this is saying without life. So for instance, if I look at this desert ecosystem again, an abiotic component would be, say, the sand. The sand isn't living, but it is crucial for this environment. We could also see those rocks in the background. Again, not living, but the organisms might use those rocks for shelter. In this frozen tundra in Alaska, of that ice, which is just water, again, non-living, but really necessary for the organisms there. So know that an ecosystem is a blend of both the abiotic and the biotic components of a region. Oh, these are some more examples: water, nutrients, shelter, so thinking about rocks or overhangs, even sunlight. Think about plants. Plants need this non-living thing, this sunlight, in order to live. All right, so let's go another tier down. So we have biosphere, we have ecosystem. Let's go to community. Now, as we get smaller and smaller, we start losing components. So here in our community, the way it differs from an ecosystem is that we no longer care about the abiotic factors. We don't care about the water or the sunlight or the nutrients or shelter or rocks or anything. Now we are only focused on the biotic components of an ecosystem. Now remember, biotic means living. So take a look at this picture. If I were to ask you what are the biotic components of this ecosystem, what would you say? Well, you can probably point out we have zebra, so these guys. We have wildebeest. We also have this tree as well as many trees in the background. There's tons of grasses. So those are what we visibly can see, but I'm sure there's a lot of insects out there. There's tons and tons of bacteria out there. So any living portion of an ecosystem. Now, as a community biologist, I might be interested in the relationships between organisms. What plants do zebras eat? So I care about two different organisms, two different biotic factors. Or what kind of bacteria can I find on these trees? Or how do wildebeest and zebras get along? How do they coexist? So those are examples of questions I could ask if I was a community biologist. All right, let's go one more step down. So thinking about a population. So a population is getting even smaller. We're still talking about biotic or living components, but now I'm going to focus in more. Now I'm only going to focus on the same species. So in this case here we have a herd of zebras, or you see this stand of trees. These trees are all part of this same species. We can look at this pride of lions. And so in this case, again, getting more and more exact or thinking on a smaller scale, I might be interested in, of these lions, how do we choose who is king or who is the Mufasa of the pride? Or thinking about these trees, how do these trees, disperse across the landscape? Or thinking about humans. How do human species evolve, or how do human species travel from place to place and, spread out? So all really important questions. But again, the whole point of this breakdown is to realize that biology is huge, and so we can narrow it down to smaller questions at different levels. Now, last but not least, at least in this unit, the last one we'll talk about is an individual organism. In this case, we'll talk about a multicellular organism. So organisms made of more than one cell, like us. Here we have a baboon, a tree, a cheetah cub. Certain bacteria are also multicellular, funguses or fungi, all sorts of organisms. Now, for me, this is kind of the level I used to study at. I studied brown pelicans. So looking at one species, I really didn't care about the entire population. I didn't care about all of the pelicans, but instead, I cared about certain issues. I looked at mercury in brown pelicans. I might be curious, how does this tree get water all the way from its roots, all the way to its leaves? I might be interested in this cheetah. How is its muscle structure adapted to make it run faster and catch its prey? So that's where we're going to stop this first part of this lecture. Take a break, review your notes before starting the next video.